Okay, so again we're following straight on from part 2 in this video, and we got all the blocking work out of the way and all the filler work out of the way on the super build. So now it's time for some high build primer. So we did this in 2 coats using the Capsi 634 high build and using the Devilbiss GPR in a 1.8. Now I have left this primer quite thick. It's a very thick primer as it is, but we want the build, because in the next section of this job, what we're going to do once this is fully cured for a few days is give it a block down with a P320, and then we're going to DA it with a 500 ready for its final stage, in essence, which will be wet on wet right before the colour. Now the reason that we're going to block this down again is just to give it that extra little bit of love, to try and make sure that everything is as right as possible before that paint goes down. Like we've just got the paint in for this, or when we got the paint in for this, it was I think around about 400 quid just for the base coat tints for us to mix this in-house. Which is not the cheapest in the world. It's going to take a lot of paint. I think in total there's going to be 8 to 9 layers, and that's just the tint, so that doesn't include the cost of the wet on wet and the clear coat and the hardeners and the thinners and everything else that's going to go into it. That day in the booth, it's going to be a very expensive day in the booth, so we want to make sure that all the prep on this is 1000% before we go chucking literally probably around about 1,000 quid worth of materials on this shell to give it that final colour and that final nice glossy coat. So I'm starting off in the engine bay here, and this just goes to show for some of you guys watching at home that even people like myself are still learning. So when we put the super build on, I tried to get around the engine bay from the outer, and it was near impossible. I caught the airline on the inside of the engine bay, and I just couldn't get around some of the areas properly like I wanted to. And especially even in here, all this battery tray and everything, there's a lot of overhangs which you just can't reach from the outside. And a lot of this has had filler work around this battery tray as well to tidy all this up and make sure it looks absolutely 100%. So we need to make sure that this is fully coated up, and especially when we come around to the paint stage again, we don't want to be missing any areas. So we learn on the super build stage that we do need to get in the engine bay in order to paint inside here. Now we did think about painting the engine bay in the candy and then masking it off, and then painting the outside the shell. Unfortunately though, there is just no place to actually stop it where we could get a clean enough finish, so it's going to be very awkward, and I'm going to have to get in and out of the engine bay when we paint this, which is going to be very tricky, and we have to be very, very careful when I do it. But one way or another, we will make it work. It's going to be what's best for the car when it's finished, looks-wise and finish-wise, so that's going to be the best way to go about it. So the Capsi 634 that I'm using, it's 2:1, and then 30% thinners is what I put in it. It's a very, very thick high build, but it blocks really well, it dries really well. It's just overall I found it a very, very good, efficient high build to use. As you can tell here, it is going on quite textured. I want that really big build to this. I don't want to be messing around putting like a light coat on it. I want 2 really heavy coats, because I know when I block this out, I'm going to take at least 1 coat off, and then it's going to need enough meat left so that when we DA it up to a 500 ready for the wet on wet to go on, this, you know, that the shell's as covered as possible still. And if there are any slight little wobbles or any little niggles or any little pinholes or anything, or just any tiny little marks that have been missed, which fingers crossed they shouldn't have, it does give us that extra little bit of depth that we can use. But obviously we can't put this on anywhere near as thick as we put the high build on, because high build, unlike polyester spray filler, will shrink back. So we want to keep, although we're putting 2 heavy coats on, we don't want to be putting like 3 or 4 really thick coats of this on to get it to the same kind of film thickness as we did with the super build, because high build just isn't as good in that respect. Now, in the video, I've kept 1 coat of the high build on. I thought 1 coat is around 20 minutes as it is over this shell, especially with all these little grooves and these little edges that we're trying to make 100% sure that we get full coverage on, so that when we sand everything down, everything's nice. Now, during the super build process and during the primer process, and probably during the wet on wet process as well, I'm trying to plan my way to try and figure out, for me, what is going to be the best route around this shell when I come to paint it. Obviously, being a TVR, there is a lot of vents, there are a lot of holes, there are a lot of edges, there are a lot of tight shuts to get around. So I need to sort of try and work my way around in a plan that's going to work. The only bonus is that like these headlight areas here that are really tricky and would be extremely tricky to get the candy in, they actually end up satin blacked, because there's a cover that goes over those for the light section. So that's one bonus. But at the same time, when I do paint this shell, we're going to have all the panel work. So the doors are going to be in here, the bonnet's going to be here, the vents are going to be in here. So basically everything that's really noticeable on this main body is going to be in here at the same time, being done it all at once, to try and make sure we can get the best finish on this candy possible. But at the same time, that does make for a little bit of a tricky paint job. We did it when we did the McLaren. That was not the easiest thing to do. We were literally pulling stands out, putting coats on bumpers and then moving bumpers back in again in order to try and do it. It wasn't the most fun task at all. Candies on this scale in a normal size booth aren't, and just candies in general aren't the most fun. Like I said, material cost on this, when it comes around to paint day, is probably going to be around about £1,000. That's going to be without labour, fuel, electric, all the rest of it that's going to go into it on that day. It's going to be a very expensive day, so we want to make sure that all this prep work is 1,000% before we get to that. And on the day, we're going to have a really, really slow day. Take your time, plan things out as much as possible, and we're already starting to plan out the paint stage at the primer stage, to find our best route around the car, etc. And you know, people who say like everything in our job is about the preparation, and it's not just the preparation of the paint. You know, you're planning for how you're going to go about a job. I'm thinking about that as soon as a job comes in. You know, how we're going to get around it, what's the easiest route going to be, what's going to be the most comfortable way for me, because the more comfortable it is for me, the easier I'll find it, the less stressful it'll be, etc, etc. They're all things to sort of think about when you're planning, you know, how you're going to go about painting a big job like this. If it was a car that had sort of a normal bonnet shut, that didn't have like the big scuttle piece included, and there was just some way to stop it, then we may paint the engine bay on something like this first with the candy, mask the bay off so we can just do the exterior of the shell. But because of the way that this TVR is, there's no real nice place to stop it. If it was something like a standard metallic colour, we could probably get away with it, and we could do a little cheeky clear blend somewhere. But obviously with the candy, it's just not worth the risk. So instead, we're going to have to do it all in one and just be extremely careful about how we do it. And also, just it's going to cost, you know, being a bit of extra masking and stuff. But in the end, pardon me, for the customer, it's going to end up with a much cleaner, nicer finish to the overall shell if it's all done in one piece and separate parts, but all in the booth at one time, so everything's the same shade. Some people say that you should have the whole car bolted together. Personally, I've never had an issue with this, whether it be candies or not, in doing the parts separately, as long as it's all being done at the same time. There's some ancillary parts like the vents that bolt on underneath, etc., which can be done separately, because if something at the very bottom was half a shade out because of the shadows on the car, etc., you wouldn't notice if there was the tiniest tone difference in it. But obviously if you're going to bolt a door to the side of this or bolt the bonnet on, you will notice by a mile if that's out. When we did the McLaren, we did quite a few parts, like the mirrors, the rear spoiler, a few other bits and bobs off the car, and when it all went together it went on fine and there was no issues with any colour difference. Being the same colour that we've already done before, you know, it gives us that little bit of confidence that we already know what we're doing with this colour, because myself and the lad that I'm painting it with, Kerry, on the day, we both have done multiple candies together now. We find because there's so much labour involved in it, having a two-man team on it does make things a little bit easier. It means that one can put a coat down, the next guy can come in and do the next coat, and you know, you can both get a bit of a rest in the middle, because it will be a very long day. It's probably going to be like an 8, maybe 10-hour day to get this painted on the day, so it's going to be a lot longer than your average paint job. Normally I'm only in the booth for maybe, I don't know, maybe 2-3 hours tops. On this day we're going to be in the booth probably all day, start to finish. So I hope you guys have been enjoying this series so far. I've tried to keep in as much detail as I can. Obviously on jobs like this it's hard to film a lot of detail and obviously do the job, because on a big job like this, like the last video, that was 24 hours worth of work split up into one video. So trying to video all that and move cameras around as well as actually do my job sometimes is a little bit difficult. And if you are someone who gets something from the channel, feel free to take a look at the channel memberships. I'm going to be uploading some members only videos and some longer versions of the videos that are on the channel in the members section, so any of you guys that do become members will be getting a little bit extra in return for supporting the work that we do here. Also want to say a massive thank you to everyone who shared the first video in this series out there after we got hacked the other month. If you guys, you know, did that, feel free to keep doing that with future videos. The more shares we get, the more comments, the more likes, the more we're going to grow, and the more it's going to enable us to make some awesome content like this, and hopefully get some more sick cars in like this as well, that we can do some amazing paint jobs on and really sort of up the bar with the sort of things that we're doing, and get more detail in videos for you guys as well. Now in the next part in this series, we're going to be going through all the prep that we're going to do on the shell. So rather than just do the primer stage and skip to the paint stage, we're going to go through in the next video everything that we do to the shell to prep this shell for paint. And then in the final video or two, if it ends up 2 videos, I'll probably upload them the same weekend on the paint stage. But the final video, or say the final videos, will be the paint, and then obviously like the polish, and showing you the car finished at the end of it, just so you can see the kind of whole stages that we go through. I mean, by the time we blocked this, I'd say, I don't know, maybe we were probably 100, more than 100 hours into this, like preparation and bodywork and primer and blocking on this shell. I'd say a car like this has probably got like 150, maybe 200 hours in it when it's finished completely, and that's as long as you don't get any issues. I know a lot of you guys have asked, you know, what sort of something like this costs. It's very job specific. It's very colour specific as well. So for instance, a colour like this will add, like the candy colour that this customer's having, will add a lot more cost to a job than say if you did on it silver, or if you did on it white or black, or a standard car colour. Because we're, in essence, with it being a candy, we're kind of base coating this whole car twice, which doubles the cost of the base. And because we're putting twice as much base down, we've got longer flash off times between coats. There's just a lot more work involved with candies, so you have to be a lot more OCD with your prep, and also the cleanliness. You know, the boot's going to get stripped out and cleaned down, and everything's going to have to be done before you paint a car like this, because you just cannot afford to have any mishaps or mistakes with it. But again, we'll go through all that in the future videos as we get further through this series. But I do hope you guys have enjoyed everything that we've shown so far. So the next video we'll go through guide coating the shell, how to check round for any little pinholes and stuff, and then we'll be blocking the whole shell out with a P320. So we'll be using probably the CM mesh for this, so we can get a real nice cut all the way around with the 320. We'll then re-guide coat it again, and then give it a full DA over with a 500 on the DA with the extractor, just to give it that final finish and refine all those marks down, ready for the wet on wet to go over the top. So by the time we've done this car, or by the time I've finished prepping this shell, I would say I've rubbed every part of this car, maybe, I don't know, we've probably blocked over this car maybe 6 times in total, between all the stages with filler and the original sanding and everything. It's crazy just how many hours and how many times you go over the same car. Plus, you know, we're talking paint wise, we'll have probably gone over it maybe 20 different times with all the different coats that go into a car like this. It's pretty mental when you think about it. At the same time, you know, I guess for customers to see the work that we put into a car, it's good, because, like, for instance, this customer can see the kind of level of detail that we've gone to. He can see all the work that we put into his car, and also for anybody who's looking at getting a paint job like this, it gives you guys a bit of a better idea of just why costs are so high for a job like this. I mean, for a job like this, I'd say, depending on where you are, depending on who does it for you, I mean, you could be looking at, I don't know, maybe there might be somewhere that'll do you for 5 grand. There might be somewhere that'll be like 10 grand, maybe plus, depending on how bad your particular car is or how bad the shell is. I mean, the bonus with this one was that the customer's done a mountain of work to this before we got it. So bodywork wise, as far as filler etc goes, there was not a lot to do. There was barely any filler work to do, just a few small little spots, just where there was some lows that I wasn't happy with. There was no cracks in the fiberglass or in the gel coat. Again, massive bonus. That could be hours or days worth of work if you've got one of these shells that's cracked or the gel coat splitting, because you need to grind it out. You then need to either re-fiberglass resin it or epoxy resin it, potentially re-gel coat it if you wanted to. You know, there'd be a lot of work involved if this was like an accident damaged shell, for instance, that we were trying to mint up like this one. So, you know, when people sort of message us for prices, sometimes like, oh, you know, how much does that paint job cost? It's very car dependent, it's colour dependent, it's the cost. We can't just sort of give a ballpark figure because every job is different. What we normally do is give an estimated cost between one price and another price, and on a job like this they can be thousands and thousands of pounds apart, depending on the car, the colour, the amount of work, what the substrate's like, because it might come in and you might think, oh, it'll be alright when it comes in, we can just sand that down, and then it comes in, you need to bare metal it. You just never really know. But I think I've just pretty much managed to waffle throughout the best part of this whole video, so I'm sorry for that. We are coming towards the end of this now. Like I said, I've only included one coat for this, because if I include both coats of this primer, I'm just going to bore you for like 40 minutes or longer. And as usual, I have cut out, like, you know, topping the spray gun out up and stuff like that, because that alone would probably knock the video up to like 30 minutes. But I hope you have enjoyed this week's video. I hope you can join us next week for what will be part 4, so the prep ready for paint on this shell. And like I say, if you do enjoy it and you get something from these videos, do us a favour, it costs nothing. Give it a like, give it a share to one of your favourite Facebook groups or one of your favourite forums or somewhere. Drop a comment. you know, tell us what you think of the video. If you've got any questions, drop them down in the comments below, and we will do our best, as always, to get back to you and answer everything that we can. So I'm going to leave this one here for this week, guys. I'll leave you with the last little section of this and a little walk around at the end. So that's it for me for today, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Things aren't as they were before. You best start bracing. Did you think you could keep us out? Shut the gates, forget us now. Tides are changing. Can you hear the sound? Can't stop us now. We're not back in town, know what we're doing. Things are about to change, it's evolution. Voices shake the ground, you feel it moving. We're the revolution. Can you hear the sound? Ground beneath your feet, with a whisper in the trees. Do you feel us watching? Hunger in our eyes, victories on our minds. It's our time to rise. Can you hear the sound? Can't stop us now. We're not back in town, know what we're doing. Things are about to change, it's evolution. Voices shake the ground, you feel it moving. We're the revolution. Can you hear the sound? We're not back in town, know what we're doing. Things are about to change, it's evolution. Voices shake the ground, you feel it moving. We're the revolution.